Good evening. I mean, it's evening for me at least. It's evening. It's almost evening for you, right? Right?
Almost. It's
Yeah.
3:22. It's okay.
Well, okay, close enough. Well, impromptu. We've got an hour before we go stream with, or before we go do a user group with our friend Code with Sean. So I've got work to do, and I thought, why not?
Do it live.
Yeah, the Bill O'Reilly way.
Yeah.
We'll do it live. Oh yeah, I can't say that. Sorry. Anyway, so
We have 12
let's-
people on the stream. That's amazing. Thanks for coming,
Really?
folks.
Oh,
Yeah.
nice. Thanks. Yeah.
Welcome, everyone.
Good
What are you up to?
evening. Yeah. What's everybody doing? Happy time zone, I guess. So,
Indeed.
okay, so here's the scoop. Here's the skinny.
Yes.
So
Tell us.
B2C has no authorization system, right? Well, I shouldn't say no, but it doesn't have one that you're used to if you're using Azure AD, right? It doesn't have appRoles and all that sort of stuff. The thing is,
Correct.
because B2C is built on top of Azure AD and uses a lot of Azure AD plumbing, because of that, I thought, well, there's no point in reinventing that wheel and all the admin UI and all the stuff that goes into that. So I thought, well, why don't we use the appRole plumbing and we'll just hit it through Graph. So I started by using B2c Policies to make this work. And where I'm running into trouble with this in particular is in parsing out the JSON that comes back from Graph.
Okay.
Because it's coming from Graph, I don't have any control over it, right? Like I don't have the ability to say it is or it isn't.
Yep.
And if we look at what comes from Graph for these things, let me pull this up. If I go look at what Graph is going to show us, I had another window. Here it is. If we go look at what Graph is going to show us, right? So if we look, so this is an appRole assignment, right? So when you get assigned an appRole in Azure AD, because all that UI still exists and all the plumbing still exists, when you get assigned an application role, that comes back in the token as a role, right? Except when you're using B2C, because B2C doesn't expose any of that functionality.
Yep.
And if you start digging into how B2C works, it uses this thing called Trust Framework, and that's the thing that actually does the login. And weirdly enough, that login that happens is actually happening via an ROPC call, a remote resource owner password credential, that B2C is doing through this proxy IEF app, all the stuff you have to do to set up custom policies. Which would mean that if you wanted to put roles on there and have them come back in the token, you'd have to add them to that proxy IEF app. And the problem with that is, of course, you're registering 50 apps because you got 50 apps in your business or something, and now you got to put all the roles in one place. So it just doesn't scale. So instead, what we're going to do is we're still going to use the same assignment UI and everything else, right? So in B2C, let me come over. You notice when you're in B2C, you've got this B2C blade, but you also have a regular Azure AD blade, right? And you still have regular enterprise applications, just like you would normally in a normal one. So if I came over here and I think I called this, what did I call this app? We'll do here it is, the sample app, right? So we've got the sample app, and I put an appRole on it, and the advantage is that I can assign these B2C users into these roles. So my Gmail account, which is just a normal whatever, has the admin role that we created. So this assignment works just like it would work in a normal thing. Problem is you don't get it in the tenant. Hey, what's up, El Capitan Squirrel and Janiscu? Thanks for coming and hanging out with us. We're doing sort of a quick hitter before Code with Sean's user group. So anyways, we got the plumbing, and the problem is we have to do we have to go and figure all this stuff out through Graph. So we have to make Graph calls to get the roles back in the token, as opposed to just them coming along with it by virtue of it, because it's B2C, it's not regular Azure AD. But it saves me from having to have a database where we create all this linkage and stuff somewhere else. So we won't stay very long either, El Capitan. So, okay. So if we look at what we get back, this is an array of appRole assignments. And like most things at Microsoft, it's just an array of GUIDs. So we've got the appRole ID, we've got the created date time, blah, 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 blah. There are all these different things in here, but the point is, the principle, this is my user account, my B2C user account, right? This is the principle, 39A, blah, blah, blah. The resource ID is the application we want to sign into, or the application we have the role on, which is FD076AA, right? So what we need to do is a graph query that looks like this. Make it a little bit bigger. And the graph query is going to be to users. Oops. I'll make it a little bit bigger, more in the middle. So the user here is me. So this is my user account. I'll say my B2C user account. And then hanging off of everybody's user account is this appRole assignments path. And the appRole assignments path is a way to say, hey, get me all of my appRole assignments, right? And then there's a filter, and the filter is filtering to the application I am accessing. Yep. So we're going to filter down to the application we're accessing. So in order for us to, and then really the answer to this is, well, am I in a role? And if I am, we want the roles to be stuffed into the B2C role claim, right? And it is, yeah, it's all OData. So it's OData, although not all of the filters work, not all of the selects work. And in fact, one of the other things that I've been struggling with earlier today is that if I go get the list of app roles that are available for an app, I can't filter it. The filter just straight up doesn't work, right? So let me get some of this stuff out of the way. If I'm trying to show this list, so here's a list. It's just an array of 2 app roles that are built for my app. Let's say I just want to get one. So I'm just going to take this ID, and if I try to just get one, like with app roles in the path,
it doesn't work.
It doesn't work. Okay, so that doesn't work. So then, okay, well, let's try our filter. So that's a $filter ID EQ GUID. Well, that doesn't work. It says it's a syntax error. So it's like, oh, okay, well, maybe it's a string. Oops, maybe it's a string instead of a GUID. Well, unfortunately, when we put ticks around it to indicate that it's a string, then it says bad request, it's an invalid filter because the type actually is EDM GUID. So we're still stuck with not being able to filter out our app roles, which is kind of lame, to be honest. But whatever, we can talk to people and try to make that work. And so this was problem 1, which was if I get back this list of app roles for an app, I have to translate the ID over to the name. Because if you're used to using Azure AD app roles, those come over in a name. Sorry, not the name, the value, right? Unfortunately, when we look at the appRole assignments in the graph, so the things that I'm assigned to, you'll notice I only have the ID.
Yep.
I don't have the value. And telling somebody, it's just like when you're using appRoles in Azure AD. Well, except for the fact that you got to use this GUID, it doesn't work very well, right?
It's not the same as yet getting group assignments in the token. They have to go and do a graph call to find the names.
Exactly. Yep. Although appRoles come over as names, and granted, we can make groups come over as names now too. But at any rate, trying to parse that array out in claims transformations in B2C, I've tried all day to do it, and I just don't think it's going to happen. At least it's not going to happen right now. I'll tell you that much. So what I decided was, since I'm making these graph calls anyway, right? So we got to make at least 3, maybe 4 graph calls. Since we got to make these calls anyway, I'm thinking let's let a function do it, at least to prove that our idea is somewhat sustainable. So let's let a function go to the graph for us and do all the calls, and then just essentially send us back an answer, right?
And that means that we can use the custom policy to do that call to the function, get everything in one go, and not have to deal with parsing and what have you, right?
Yeah. So the function is going to use client credentials. It's going to go connect to the graph, and it's going to make these calls for us. So that's where I was. That's what I was working on, and I just finished dinner and thought, well, since we're going to do this user group shortly, let's go plow through as much of this as we can between now and then. Mm-hmm. So the way that we send data into these is pretty straightforward, and we're going to wrap OAuth around this API here shortly, but just not yet. So I need a couple packages. We need MSAL, so that's .NET Add Package Identity.Client, right?
Did you know that you can actually use Microsoft Identity Web now on the function?
That's what I've heard.
Do you want me to give you the link for that?
Yeah, give me the link.
Do you want to go down that route, or do you want to do MSAL?
Doesn't matter to me. We can do whichever. Do I have to set up? Do I have to set up a function startup and all that?
Yep.
Okay, let's come back to it because I just want to. I mean, you know what? You're right. Let's just do that.
I put in the chat. So grab the link from our very good friend Sahil Malik. He did the blog post a couple of weeks ago, and it has all the steps.
Okay, so Sahil, who works on our team, and in fact, who was on the show right before the holiday. Oh, good. He put the code link at the top. That's all. That's all we're really going to use, right?
See, there you go.
So let's
there for you.
So let's go steal his startup. So he's got a normal function startup, right? Nothing too crazy here.
There you go. Perfect.
Yeah, nothing too wild here. Okay.
Yep.
So I'm going to move this over here. I'm going to move this over here, and let's. I guess I'll just create a new file in here. This will be startup.cs. And in our startup, we need, let's see, we need a few usings. I need to add this package, which is identity.web.
Correct, Amendo. And I think you also need the Microsoft, you might need...
Do we need the functions dependency stuff, or is that
no,
the functions extension available?
I think that's built in, but I could be wrong.
All right,
Let me see if he's got any packages that you need to add. Yes, you need to add. It's two packages. One is exactly as the name says, Microsoft Azure.functions.extensions, and the identity.web. Nothing else.
Okay. Let's see. What is my namespace? Funk. Very creative. Funk.startup. Okay, so our namespace is funk. We're going to do a class called startup. It's going to derive from functions startup. Okay, cool. So the only thing we really need here is override void configure, and then I functions host builder. Okay.
You know you can't copy paste, right?
Well, I know, but I remember it better if I write it. So. But that's okay, because it looks like there's actually very little here that we need. So we shall use these. So we've got our config.
JP or me? I need to know who won. C# DevOps says he has a point. I don't know if it was a point for me or a point for you.
Is it my hair? It was kind of pointy earlier. My kid told me that. Okay, so let's see. Function startup. I guess I do need the package with... I do need that Azure Extensions package, don't I?
Yeah.
Okay, let's go look in here. What do we have? Azure Functions Extensions. Cool, easy enough. .NET add package. Oops. Okay, so that's cool. So that's there now. Good. All right, so we've got our enable token acquisition to call downstream API, blah, 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 blah. Now, here's my question to you. If I do add Microsoft Graph?
Yes.
I mean, all I'm doing is...
Oh, wait. You need the Microsoft identity.web.graph package.
Yep. Okay. Identity.web.graph.
No, yeah, the full thing.
Okay. So does that work now? Or does it need a thing? It's not contain addition for... Where does that hang off? Is that enable token
acquisition? Well, yeah, that should be.
Oh, you know what? I guess I need a using identity.web.graph, perhaps? No. Oh, it's not there. Okay.
Did not install it.
Oh, good idea. Maybe it didn't. There are no versions available. Oh, I need pre-release, don't I? It's early. It's
It's late.
It's an early package. It's a beta package. Oh no, that didn't
do
work
we have
either.
a pre-release? Interesting.
There are no versions available for the package.
What?
Microsoft Identity. Oh, interesting.
Did we pull it out and then we have a different integration?
No, I think it's still there. Let's go look.
It's
Microsoft
1.4.1. Are you mistyping something? Oh, it's .Microsoft Graph. It's not Graph. It's .Microsoft Graph.
.Microsoft Graph. Okay.
Yes. Sorry. My bad.
So here we have our naming conventions. Every time I go to it, I get a 404. Yuck. Okay. All right. So, okay, good. So now that's resolved. Now, if I remember correctly, I mean, so this is all it takes to get a graph client. So most of the graph work is done for us, right?
Yeah.
I actually, we'll do authentication on here later. I actually kind of don't. I mean, right now I don't really need authentication, but whatever. In fact, I don't know if I really want authentication at the moment. I'm just going to use the code. So that gets interesting. I wonder. Actually,
So
no. Because I don't need
how are you gonna get the access token for graph?
client config or client credentials. So this function is just going to authenticate as itself.
Right. So
I almost wonder if we don't even need
maybe
it.
for now we disable this one and then we use MSAL and then we can come back and revisit this.
Yeah.
What do you say?
We'll come back. Yeah, we'll come back.
Yeah.
So let me make sure. Do I still have identity client in here for MSAL?
No, you need to get it.
Okay, so I've got identity client. I guess we'll leave this as is for now. Okay.
Although that's interesting. I would expect that it wraps around MSAL, right?
Well, it does wrap around MSAL, but I'm wondering what we need. Oh, you know what? It's token acquisition for app instead of for user. That's what it is. There's a certain method for that, but I kind of don't want authentication on it yet because it's just one more thing
Let's
I
make
have
it
to
work
configure.
for the graph first, and then we can add authentication at the back of it.
So one thing we could do in here is we could go ahead and add builder services, add Microsoft or client. What is it? The client. Oh, I feel like I've totally lost my brain. Microsoft Identity Client, confidential client application. There we go. So we want to get us our confidential client app, and in here we will create a new one. Let's see. Of course, we probably don't really. I'm not even going to worry about this yet because we're still in a static function because we're not doing anything yet. So let's just move that out of the way.
Yep.
Okay, so I need a confidential client app. I'm just going to call that CCA, new confidential, and I never remember how to build these. Confidential client application. I never know if I'm supposed to new one up or if I'm supposed to use the builder. Do you remember?
No, but I can find out.
Confidential client app builder dot create. There we go. And here we need to give it a client ID. And then we need a with client secret, which we'll go and get. And then we need with tenant ID. And the tenant ID in this case, let's go get that from the B2c portal, wherever that might be. And what's interesting about this is we are interacting with B2c not as B2c itself, but as Azure Active Directory underneath. So we're kind of going to a different token endpoint. So instead of talking to B2c and treating it as though it's B2c, we're going to treat it as if it is just a normal Azure AD tenant. So like most of these things show you, oh, it's the Azure AD for Office 365. Like, well, it's kind of not, but that's okay. So then we get our tenant ID. So, and then we do a .build on that guy, and now we can do a CCA acquire token for client for a specific resource. Perfect, cool. And our client, and there are scopes in this case, are going to be graph.microsoft.com/.default. And because we are doing client credentials, so it's just app to app. There's no user involved here. Because we're just doing client credentials, we have to use this .default scope. And what this means is that because it's just a client app, right? So there's no interactivity. There's no point where a user is going to say, "Oh, I consent to this" or do whatever. So by saying .default, what we're really saying is, give me any permissions that have already been configured. So if you're familiar with Azure AD from years past, this is the way it used to be, where you had to go configure what your APIs are, what API access you had, and what resources, and blah blah blah. This goes back to that behavior, but because we're in that because we're in the world of confidential client application or client credentials, where we're just sending credentials over the wire, we don't have to. We won't ever have an opportunity to do that. Cool. So we've got our acquire token for client. We're going to do an execute async on that, and this is going to get us our graph token. So now we've got our graph token. Now it's time for our perennial debate. Do I use the graph client or just make HTTP calls? What do you think?
HTTP calls.
Really? I'm surprised.
Yeah.
Here I was all ready to go plug it in.
See, I brought that surprise to you. You didn't expect that to happen, did you?
I was not expecting that at all. But that's good because I already know what the HTTP calls are, and I honestly don't know what they would be for graph. So,
well, you can use Graph Explorer to find the call if you wanted to, but let's not go there.
Okay, so we got our configuration. Oh, by the way, hey, look, I made our graphics. They got fixed.
Yeah, thanks.
So it actually shows up, and thanks for following us. Thanks for following us. Xcoimp. Is this like Xerox? Is it Xcoimp? Okay. Anyway, sorry. All right. Back to work. Okay. So I'll call this graph token to be more explicit. So we got to go get our configuration, which we'll get that sorted here in a minute. So the first thing we need to do is so let's think about what we're going to have coming in. We're going to have two things coming from a user, coming in from B2C. So our inbound stuff, we're going to have the user's object ID, so who the user is, and then we are also going to have the the client ID of the application the user is accessing. So that means the first thing we need to do is translate the the client ID to a service principal ID, then get the user's app role assignments for that service principal. Then, if the user has any, get the value of the assigned app roles. That's the thing I was just talking about how it only sends over the GUID, so we got to go resolve the GUID. So resolve the GUID to value of the assigned app roles, and then we're going to return that. So what our return is going to look like is essentially a roles array, which is the roles the user has. Okay. It is a Surface keyboard. I'm probably just hitting it very hard. But it is a Surface one.
You are.
Somebody was talking about wireless, like, oh, is your whole desktop wireless? Somebody was talking about that the other day. And I was like, it is, but not by design, because I've got one of these MX Ergo things too, which I love these trackballs. Trackballs like driving a manual transmission, because nobody will steal your mouse because nobody knows how to use them. So nobody will steal your car if it's a manual. So, okay, so we need to make a couple HTTP things. So first, let's. So when we're in a static function, I seem to remember we could handle the HTTP drama. But was it by doing a private one here?
Private static HTTP client, yeah.
Okay, so we'll do our static HTTP client here. And do we just do a new one? Because I've only done that using the injected one.
Yeah, it's...
Oh, the namespace can't... Oh, yeah, duh. Okay, yeah, there we go. Put this in the class itself. And it's telling me... Make it read-only. Yeah, we can make it read-only. Why not? We're not going to be changing that later. Okay.
Correct.
So we've got our token. So the next thing we need to do is configure our HTTP client. So that's client default request headers authorization, and that's a new authentication header value, which is of type bearer, and then token graph token dot access token. Now we should probably put some to do error handling. Good. Now I don't feel bad about it. So we're going to add our authentication header value to make our HTTP call. I will delete this and do a using so that our code isn't so messy. I guess I just have to do it myself. System.that HTTP headers. Okay. So we're going to do our authentication header value, and that should be the same for all of these calls. So our first call is, let's just do, for the moment, let's just do user object ID and client ID. These two are going to be coming in from our thing, from our incoming request from B2C. So we're going to take these two, and then our first call that we need to make. Thanks for following. See, we got another zero. That's
how you pronounce it. Sure. Very clever.
Okay.
Very clever.
It's like 3 ways to say 0 in 5 characters.
I think we can find more if you wanted to, but
it's super efficient. So the first call, let's see. So I'm getting the user object and the client ID in. So the first thing I need to do is I got to translate this client ID over. And translating the client ID means we got to go find the service principal that maps to that client ID. So let me get my Graph Explorer back up over here. Get some of this other stuff out of the way. Where did my Graph Explorer go? Okay. So the first call we need to make is to find our, let's see, it would be to find our service principals so we can find who's assigned to what. So the first thing we're actually going to do is we're going to do a call to service principals, and we're going to use the app ID to find that. So let's see. Oh, my history is quite long here. So let's take this query over here and move it into our code. So the first call we've got to make is something that looks like this. So we're going to do service principals, and we're going to filter on the app ID. And the app ID is essentially the client ID. And that's what's going to be coming in. So our service principal request. Oh yeah, and there's a short link to it too. C# DevOps, which is aka.ms/GE. So you can get there really quickly. Look at that. Great mod. So our service principal translation request, that's going to be a client.getAsync, and await client.getAsync. We're going to be going to, I guess I could put this in the root of my thing, couldn't I? There's a base URL we can put into our HTTP client. Let's see. And then the base address will be https://graph.microsoft.com/v1.0. Can I set that? Oh, it needs to be a URI. Okay, so a new URI. Cool. So now instead of having to type graph every time, we can just do the rest of it. So what we need here is we need service principals /
just to go back on line 29, we're using .default because it's an application to application service authentication, right? It's not a user.
Yep, it's client credentials, so that's why we have to use that
.default.
That's why we're using that .default, because this is, I mean, you can almost think of this as being like a service account, and this is like, I'm hesitant to say this, but your client ID and client secret are essentially your username and password. So, Good.
Oh,
there, Seal
thanks,
Dubois.
Corey.
What is dinner? What is dinner entertainment in COVID times anyway, though? Right. So.
True.
Um,
Low
okay.
standards? Is that what you're saying, JP?
So let's see. Our service principal translation query is this. Oops. We'll do some interpolation here, and our filter is going to be app ID EQ, and the app ID that we get in from the request, which right now is client ID. Okay. So we're going to go make this request, service principal translation query. And let's see. So if our this might be too verbose. Service principal translation request is success status code. If it is successful, well, let's say this. If it's not successful, then let's just bail.
Yes.
And in fact, because of some of the nuance of B2C, what we can do, is so if it's not a success status code, let's just return a new conflict result, which is a 409. And this is a very B2C specific thing, which is a B2C specific thing. So, and I don't think I can do it that way. I can't use is success status code in that way. I guess not.
Why not?
Oh, I'm using it as a method. It's a property.
Yeah, it's an email.
So we'll just return our conflict request. We'll come back to fixing that a little bit later on, but to show an error message to the user. There may also be a question of like, well, if I can't get role data, do I still want to let the user sign in and just they don't have their roles? Like, we have to figure out, do we want to fail safe? Do we want to fail open? Like, how do we want to fail? But we can get that. So, okay. So is success status code conflict result? If it's not successful, then yeah, let's just get out of here. If it is successful, then let's see.
Return the rules. Don't get the rules for me.
Service principal translation request. We want to get the content and let's read.
Async.
I guess I guess we'll just well, you know what we'll do.
Read as serialize it.
We'll do a read as stream, and then we'll do a system text JSON serializer, deserialize, async, and then our stream, which is here.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
You need to await that, right?
Yeah. We'll await that. So var. Actually, dynamic result equals.
Whoa, that's dangerous.
Oh, it's fine. Nobody will know. They'll never know. How will they know?
Oh,
But
nice.
I need to await that one. Okay. So deserialize needs a stream and a return type. Oops. Type of dynamic. Can I do that here? Doesn't look like it. Type of cannot be used on dynamic. Okay. Can I just use dynamic? Probably not.
Oh, I don't think you can use dynamic for deserialization.
I thought you could. I mean, you could Newton soft. I'll just go ahead and say it. Let's see. Deserialize to dynamic. Here we go. What does the internet say? System.text.json deserialize to dynamic. Number one hit. I guess we could always go and build a class ourselves. In fact, actually, that might be a good idea. We could go build a quick struct. And here's the other thing. So this is the query we're making, right? Is I need to find the app ID, but we also only need the ID. So let's just do a select ID. We'll do a select as part of our query, and by doing that select,
clever.
Yeah, we'll keep our response data very short. So here we will also do a select equals ID, and that way the only thing we're going to get back is the service principal ID.
Nice.
Which also means that the type for this is really just one field. Which again, it's like one of those things. Like, well, do I really want to? Build a class just for that? But I guess we will. Public.
By the way, we have 3 minutes.
Okay.
Time flies when you have fun.
Service principal translation response. I mean, literally, the class name is longer than the JSON that gets returned. Public string ID and and JSON property name is ID. Okay. We're going to need a using system text JSON serialization there, which is cool. Okay, so we got that. So I guess we will deserialize it into deserialize async to service principal translation response. There we go. And put another line there so everybody can see it. And we will await this whole mess of awaits. So this is our result, and hanging off of our result, we should have the ID. Okay, cool. So now we've got our service principal ID. Oops. Let's just call this service principal ID. Uh-oh. Sounds like you've got visitors.
I do indeed. Everything all right?
So this will be result.id. Okay.
Guess fun.
All right. So we've translated our service principal. We should probably just make these independent methods because I'm going to have to start coming up with some really creative variable names before too long. This result is sticking out like a sore thumb. Okay. So now we need to get the user's app role assignments. That means our next query, app role assignment query, is I've got this on in my notes, so I don't have to go find it again. The next one we need is essentially this, and this is going to give us a list of all the app roles that a member is a user of. So we've got users, the user ID, app role assignments, filter, resource ID, EQ, and then this is where we're going to put in our new service principal ID. And I don't want to hear, right now, I don't want to hear anything about all my allocations. I know this is like completely bananas right now, the number of objects that we're creating. User, object ID. Okay, so we got our app role assignment query, and now our app role assignment app role assignment request, and that is await client. I mean, this is ripe for making it separate method. Assignment query var app role assignments assignment response. Oh, I guess we're also going to need our other one too, which is, we got to go anyway, don't we?
Yeah. We're going to go in a minute.
App role assignment request dot is success status code. If it's not, then again return a conflict result, which is 409. A new conflict result. So then our response, we are going to do yet again, I come to you asking to deserialize your JSON. I can't do a Bernie Sanders impersonation, so I wasn't going to try. Deserialize async. We need a new type, and that's going to be our app role assignment request. Request
JP,
content.
it's time.
Yep. Okay. All right, everybody, go to the link that Christo's put in the chat. We're going to go talk about identity over there. We will be there. We'll be back tomorrow, right? Tomorrow morning we got some Go folks coming on. That'll be fun, and depending on how long they stick around, maybe we can get back to this because I have to do this for a customer tomorrow afternoon. So it's going to get done between now and then somehow or another. So
We might come back. You never know.
Cool. Thanks for hanging out with us, everybody. We'll see you over at Sean's.
Yeah.
See you at the
See you
Tulsa
there.
user group, because it doesn't matter if you're in Tulsa or not. Now's the time to go. So cool.
It
We'll
is.
see you soon.
Afternoon entertainment.